Hrund, welcome to the show. So great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
So for those who haven't encountered your work yet, perhaps you could share a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Hrund Gunnsteinsdóttir. I come from Iceland. I divide my time between Reykjavik and Berlin in Germany. I've done many different things in my life. I've worn many hats. Most recently, I was leading a sustainability center in Iceland before I moved to Germany to bring my book about intuition into the world. My book, which came out in the UK earlier this year and is going to be published in all continents in the world this year and next year in 13 languages, is kind of like the third big project that I undertake to explore this part of our intelligence and how fundamental it is. The previous ones were a documentary film that was shown worldwide on Netflix and is still available on streaming services around the world. And before that, I designed and directed a university program, a diploma program based on similar ideas about harnessing the two rhythms, our intuition and creative and critical thinking as we navigate the world we live in today, which is changing very fast. So to give you a shorter answer, what I do today is I'm a writer. I'm the author of InnSæi, Icelandic Wisdom for Turbulent Times. I'm also a speaker and a coach.
Fantastic. And I can say I watched your TED Talk this morning, and it is amazing. And for everyone out there, do check out the links in the show notes to the book, the TED Talk, and the documentary. I'm interested if you could give us a definition from your perspective. What is intuition?
You know, there are so many different definitions of intuition, but what I've come closer to defining it as is the productive use of unconscious information, which helps us to take better decisions and actions in different scenarios. And with this definition, I'm inspired by the neuroscientist and author Joel Pearson from Australia, who's done very interesting research work on intuition. But I also take this from people like Gerd Gigerenzer, who is a psychologist from Germany. So I'm happy to start with this definition. Then perhaps we can dive a bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does intuition support intelligence? How fundamental is it? And how does that actually work?
Yeah, thank you. So, just to put this into the perspective of how I approach intuition. So many years ago, earlier this century, I started diving into intuition. What is it? And I did it both through practice and my own research. And most of it was in the English language, because that's where most of the research came from around me when I started to really do it methodically. And then one thing led to another because of my work and networks. And I started to have conversations and interviews with experts, leaders, spiritual leaders, business leaders, scientists from around the world on intuition. What is it and why is it important in the world we live in today? And I realized that we have so many different ways of defining intuition, from the continuum of it being an irrational impulse that we shouldn't rely on, to something woo-woo that hasn't been backed by science. And then somewhere in between all of these, I would find really rigorous research and also case studies and stories of people that showed how fundamental intuition is to our intelligence. It's not a cognitive ability per se, it's really fundamental. So what that means is that in order to reason well and to analyze well, we need good intuition. And without intuition, there wouldn't be much innovation, which is very profound, isn't it? Because it's very different from how we usually approach it. So having traveled the world and spoken to all these people and read all these books, from ancient wisdom to science, it kind of brought me back to my roots, to my Icelandic background. and the Icelandic language and the Icelandic word for intuition, which is InnSæi. And I just kind of saw it with fresh eyes for the first time. And I just thought, wow, that's such a wise word, because in Iceland, we're very eccentric, we're very protective of our language, and we actually create new words for new inventions or new theories or what have you.
Hello, it's Brad Hook here, and I'm delighted to share my new book, Start With Values. It is a guide to help you discover what matters most and then bring those core values to life through tools such as micro habits. It helps you make clearer decisions through the decision-making guide. It helps you to activate your values in conversations, particularly those courageous conversations where you need to assert yourself. And it helps you explore some potential shared values, such as nature stewardship, to help us all look after this planet that we call home. Inside, you'll find thought experiments, you'll find worksheets, you'll find action plans, and lots more. If you are interested in reducing your stress and building a life that's meaningful and purposeful, get your copy now. They're available on Amazon, both as a paperback book, such as this, and in Kindle format. So if you have some feedback, please log it in the reviews. I'd love to hear your experience of bringing your values to life. This approach has helped hundreds of thousands of people around the world, and it's now ready for you. Get your copy.
And InnSæi has become the concept that I use to explain intuition, because it really holds space for the spiritual, scientific, for the poetic, which is very much part of our universe and life, and the very concrete. So to explain InnSæi, InnSæi is made up of two words, which are in and sæi. In means inside or into, and sæi means to see or the sea. And so I decided to look at this word with my colleagues, and I thought, wow, this is like a sculpture around the way a word can be like a universe in its own. And so we worked on this threefold definition of InnSæi, intuition. And that is, first of all, the sea within. And this refers to our ever-flowing unconscious mind. And the sea within cannot be put into boxes, because then it ceases to flow. And that's a very, very, very fundamental logic behind the world of intuition, which I will explain a bit later. But one of the things that intuition enables us to do is to make unexpected connections between dots that we would otherwise not make. So, like in the fast-paced world we live in today, where there's like storms of information, hitting us every day, the thing today is not that we need to know more. We have so much knowledge. The skill that we are looking for more is to synthesize all this information, see the big picture, to not get lost in the fragments, the small, isolated, abstract versions of reality, but how everything is interconnected in the real world. So this is where the sea within is so important, to align with it and understand how it works and how to be more conscious of it. And then the second definition of, or the second sort of aspect of the concept InnSæi is to see within. And that means to see inside yourself. So self-awareness, and this really applies to science, spirituality, psychology, wherever you look. The key to honing and harnessing your intuition in order to take better, wiser, smarter decisions is self-awareness, to know yourself well enough to be able to put yourself into other people's shoes, to relate, to connect, but also importantly, in order to be able to distinguish between intuition, fears, anxiety, biases, prejudices, and wishful thinking. And what this relates to is, for example, our ability, when we know ourselves well enough, we are better able to know when is a good time to consult with our intuition and when is not a good time. So, for example, when I'm upset, I'm anxious or angry, or I'm super happy and I'm totally falling in love, for example, that's not the best time to consult with your intuition.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, InnSæi, and this is what I find particularly important for this concept to help us not only understand intuition, but to actually apply it in our lives. InnSæi also means to see from the inside out. And that has to do with how we navigate the ocean of life. You know, if you just imagine that the world we live in is like the ocean. You know, it's changing very fast, it's very fluid and flexible, and we imagine that we are alone outside on the ocean. We're swimming. You know, there is no land in sight. And rule number 1 is to keep your head up, otherwise you drown, right? And then rule number 2 is to decide which direction to go in. And that's a much harder one. And it's particularly hard in the world today because our attention is constantly being hijacked by very powerful and sophisticated market forces, but also so many other things that are happening in the noise around us, in the noise inside our heads as well, because it's actually become harder and harder for us to connect within, to reflect, to find the silence that is already there in our minds. Because intuition is not, you know, kicking us in order for us to listen to it. It's always there. It's always constant. But it's absolutely up to ourselves to connect with it, activate it, align with it, and hone it.
Such a powerful concept, and it resonates so strongly with me. My first book that I ever wrote was called Surfing Life Waves, and it was basically about, you know, there's that quote by John Kabat-Zinn, which is, you know, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And I've always been fascinated with that idea of the waves beyond us. And are you ready? Are you willing to persist? It's not always going to be easy paddling out into these waves, but you know, with practice, you can start to find your flow state and actually enjoy those opportunities that come your way, and maybe avoid those that are not right for you at the time. I love the idea of the sea within. So incredible. Do you think intuition comes from the gut, as many people say, or it's a complex interplay between the gut and the brain and the central nervous system, or maybe even beyond us as well, some sort of sphere intelligence? What are your thoughts? Where does it come from?
You know, I love that question. I think before I say what I think, I know that we know very little, you know, and I always want to encourage people to think all the possibilities out there, and we are learning faster and exploring way more. Intuition is an embodied feeling. So when we say it's a gut feeling, it's totally logical to say that, because a lot of us feel it in our gut. It just kind of knots up when something's off. Or when something feels right. There's this incredible calm, you know, like the depth of the sea. There's quiet and calm in our stomachs. But like you say, there's also the whole body is like an ecosystem, and the medical world is more and more getting more into that direction, you know, understanding that the whole body is an interconnected whole, and there's a connection between the mind and the body, right? So it's we're learning about that. So when we say that intuition is an embodied feeling, what that means, and this is so important, I think, for people to know, is that throughout every hour of every day, we pick up millions of information, sensory data points with our whole body, not just the brain or eyes or ears. So our whole body is on the case, you know, just picking up information around us. And our very focused conscious mind can grasp only a tiny fraction of all this information.
Hey, Brad here. Would you believe that around 70% of the people who watch this podcast have not yet subscribed? It would mean the world to us if you click that subscribe button on whichever platform you use, so that we can stay connected with you and you'll receive notifications when we add new episodes. We really appreciate you coming and connecting with us and being part of our community. So all the best.
So the rest is stored inside our bodies. Let's say you meet someone, you have a difficult relationship with a person, that person says something to you that hits you. You try to respond in the moment, and then you continue on the day and you think everything is past, but it isn't. It may be left inside your body. It may be stirring up some old memories and all these things. So something that is familiar to us. So when we say intuition is an embodied feeling, it really is inside our whole body. And this is also related to the importance of being self-aware. So, for example, when people are practicing the muscle of intuition, we often say, pay attention to how you pay attention with all your body. So like when this happened, my stomach knotted up, or when I was going through this, I was so tense. And when I had a vagus nerve massage, I could feel how my nervous system got more regulated. And I gained more clarity of mind and all these different things. So it's definitely embodied. When it comes to the wider sphere, I write about this in my book. We show it in the film as well. And there's like so many other research around this. But in short, when you and I are in the same room and we are relating, we are working together, or we're speaking about couples or good friends, after a while, our hearts begin to beat to the same rhythm. After a while, our breathing may begin to go to the same tempo. The case study and story of the performance artist Marina Abramovic in my book and our film shows how scientists have been able to measure how our brain waves connect in thin air. This is something that we never see, but like couples that have been together for a long time, they start to think in similar ways. Their brain waves are synchronizing. So this is happening all the time. Neuroscientist Dr. Rebecca Granger-Ellis, that I also interview in my book, she has an amazing way to explain in an accessible way how our nerve cells connect with each other. For example, like when I walk into a room with a group of team members, 5 or 10 people, I come into the room and I'm like, hi, it's so good to see you. How are you? And I look people in the eye and we, there's a connection, and we sit down and then we start talking. Compare that to me walking in and just being with this black cloud over my head and just, and using really unfriendly, hostile language and just raging in there. It affects every single person in the room. So yes, our intuition is informed by our outside world. And one of the kind of biggest, I think, for us to think about when it comes to how our intuition is informed by the world around us is that intuition develops over time. So it's not something that's stuck or stagnant inside us. The way intuition is informed through all our senses, all our body, is through the environment and context that we immerse ourselves in. So what we fill our senses with is what informs our intuition. And so it changes over time. So there is this external environment that is constantly informing us. And there's only a fraction of it that is, I think, measurable or quantifiable by us. If we think about the brain waves and everything and all the different dimensions that we haven't even talked about.
And so before we trust our intuition, we should fact check through self-awareness. Am I in a fight, flight, or freeze kind of mode of my nervous system? Am I feeling high pressure? Or even, as you said, am I super happy? Because emotions can sometimes override our rational thinking. So just fact check that. Tune into, am I afraid? Am I sad? Am I craving something? Some of these potentially destructive emotions or negative emotional states. Learning how to calm the nervous system. That's what we do in resilience training, calm the nervous system, and then look to intuition for guidance. Would that be a good process?
Yes, that would be a great process. And then what I always, and from my own experience and what I always recommend is we all have to find a way to clear the way to intuition. So we are all under pressure at some point. We're all stressed at some point. And like you say, we need to find a way to access it. But in order to know what's what, I always recommend that people journal. So whether it's a stream of consciousness journaling or attention journaling that I lay out in my book is about documenting how you witness your attention and intuition in the world. Because the thing is, like, we go through so many things during the course of one day. We pay attention to so many things along the way. But do we pay attention to what it is that we pay attention to? And that's another layer, which I would kind of call it's mindfulness plus the way of the artist. It's the way artists work, or very creative people who notice things that are around us, but the rest of us don't really notice. And but this is something deeper, and it's methodical, and it's like you document how you are navigating so that you become more conscious of what is unconscious to you. So in order to know when your system is regulated, you need to have a sense of what that looks like over time. It's not enough to know it once. Do you see what I mean? So our intuition changes, we change over time. So it's like a way of being, it's a way of navigating the world.
That makes a lot of sense. Journaling, what about voice dictation? Do you have a preference? Because I've been experimenting recently with a tool whereby I use voice dictation and it transcribes it very accurately. Or do you think that actually sitting down and writing with your hands is slightly better?
So I would always say, do the voice way if it makes you actually do it. So
Yes.
like always, I would always say that. But research shows that it's more effective to write things down with your hand and with a pen or a pencil. Mm-hmm. And there is something about that ritual. You know, we just did an experiment recently with a group of climate leaders who are, the reason why I say climate leaders is because this group was defined by the fact that they were tackling some very hard challenges and work that just feels very overwhelming sometimes. And so we did different exercises. And one of the things we did was to do a stream of consciousness journaling, which means basically you write whatever is in your mind. You don't think about it, judge it. You don't try to write it the right way. You just let it go on the paper. And if you don't know what to write, you write, I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. Until you write something, just to clear the space in your, that's taking up, clear the stuff that's taking up space in your head. And one of our leaders is used to journaling, and he started to write slower than usual. And he shared the experience with us afterwards. He said, I actually wrote slower than usual, and I could feel how it tamed my thinking. Because it's like, instead of being on overdrive, going too fast, I was really noticing, like, I was really in the whole act of writing. So it's like being all in, being in that embodied experience. I also found that very interesting.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I'm definitely going to try that. So there's a case for, and it's just good practice. We type with our thumbs nowadays or on a keyboard to actually get a pen and return to handwriting, that metacognition, the awareness of what my thinking patterns are. I love it. Unconscious bias. So we have intuition, but you mentioned critical thinking is an important part of your process so that you can just fact check, because, you know, I'm walking down a street. This is a simple example. Someone who is from a different race or something like that is walking along. Suddenly my intuition screams danger. How can we just fact check that so that we don't end up manifesting unconscious biases?
Exactly. So this is a great example. You know, I think, first of all, if you are literally in a situation where you have all of a sudden it's like a download into your mind, like there's threat and I need to get out of the way, then it's probably right to get out of the way if it's like a time sensitive issue.
Yeah.
If you feel like, and this is also where journaling and self-awareness comes in, if you feel like you're repeatedly lacking trust in a person of a certain gender, if you are repeatedly or more than twice, it doesn't have to be extreme, feeling reluctant to listen to somebody, to take someone seriously, you know, all these things, then that's the work to be done in a way. So to be really honest with yourself about your biases and fears. But prejudice can be related to biases and people of certain race or something. But prejudice also means to prejudge something. So it can actually also work in our advantage sometimes. So like, I'm pre-assessing, I'm prejudging that if the flood over there has already started, it's going to reach where I'm standing now. Do you see what I mean? So prejudice is not always a negative word. And to be honest, when it comes to the decisions that we take, both through very strict statistical, analytical means, but also intuitive, like when we say intuitive means we're talking about a well-harnessed intuition based on experience and knowledge, then there is always a risk. And we can never be perfect.
Yeah.
I also think that brings us a little bit of humility and
yeah.
whatever ways we use, just like we can never be perfect. We are human beings. And there is so much that we can't explain or predetermine. But the best we can do is to really be self-aware and to show up in a way that we are at least present in ourselves with other people. We can't always be fully present, because there's just so much going on. But probably one of the most important things that we do today is to really try to be present in ourselves, because presence enables us to be prepared for the unexpected. Whether we look at business strategy or martial arts or military strategy, the more present you are in the moment, you are here and now, you get the gist of the situation as best as you can. This will prepare you the best way possible to act in the right way. This also applies to sports. Or if you're on the street and you need to take a decision in the moment, or on the top of a mountain and you're about to summit and you decide not to because it doesn't feel right. Stuff like that. So presence is, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because presence is something that we talk about. And it's like, yeah, right, it's good to be present. And then we just go on. But this is actually where we give our, deepest attention to things and are able to harness all we have in the moment. What do you think about that?
No, it's a great question. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about presence and cultivating presence. It's interesting. I've always found it relatively easy to be present. So I regard that as one of my superpowers. I started cultivating that in India when I was studying meditation for the first time, and I realized, oh, wow, I had no idea how busy the mind was. And then with practice, it became quite natural just to stay present to my own inner landscape and the external landscape. And it's a very peaceful place most of the time. It just requires being discerning about that information layer around us. So, just removing unnecessary inputs, such as from mobile phones, turning off things like push notifications. Never have that on because it drags you out of the present, and just being really aware of what's going on. And then spending time in nature has always been a fantastic way of cultivating presence for me. So going into nature, just being fully aware of the present moment without judgment. That's presence to me.
Yeah, I love that. And I've also thought a lot about, because there's so much uncertainty in the world today. So if the listeners have been on a masterclass workshop talking about, we're all afraid of change, and change is so scary and uncertainty is really scary for humans, which is to a large extent very true. We are actually also quite good at dealing with change and uncertainty. So 2 examples. The change that we decide ourselves is not so hard for us, but it's more the change that's forced upon us. So it's just something that's good to think about. And author April Rinne writes about this in her book, Flux, 8 Superpowers to Thrive in a World in Flux. And I think that's just a very important reminder for us. But also, uncertainty is about going into the unknown, right? So that's on different scales. It can be a small scale or a big scale. And so, for example, when you and I walk into a meeting, or anyone listening to this podcast walks into a meeting, they don't have a script. So it's actually a very creative process. If you go into details, it's like, hi, is that person in a good mood or a bad mood? And then, does something awful happen at the meeting or doesn't it? And how do I deal with it if this person asks something I don't know? We're always navigating uncertainty in a way. So I think it's just, for the times we live in, it's important not to get paralyzed over things like that, and understanding how presence enables us to be resilient and to be receptive and be prepared for the unexpected in the moment.
I absolutely agree. I never thought of that meeting process as being highly creative, but it is. It's generative. You're in the moment and you're interacting and you're kind of co-creating a shared reality. It's an incredibly creative process.
Very.
I'm interested in how intuition manifests in different types of people. Do you find that creative people are more intuitive or highly empathetic people? Because I probably tick both of those boxes. I have high empathy, high creativity, and I've always had this extremely strong intuition. And when I act out of alignment with intuition, in my experience, the outcome is never good. And when I act in alignment with it, generally the outcomes are excellent.
Exactly. So I think this is a great question. And so what I would say is that I suspect that people who are highly creative, well, I think we already know this, that they are more in tune with their intuition. I think that people who are grounded in their intuition in this way, they are better able to connect with others and empathize with others as well. But there is also something about intuition that I'm not sure intuition is always empathetic. At least when you look at the science, the science is still like really bringing us a relatively narrow view of intuition. So like intuition and creativity, those of us who are creative know that we follow our intuition.
Yes.
It's this and for decades and decades and all of my upbringing and going to school and everything, these two things were never taken seriously: intuition and creativity.
Yes, same.
And I think that most of us would agree that this is a problem. So I do think that you're right in saying that creative people are also like really sensing their environment. It also makes them creative because they notice stuff around them. But what we've also found in research is that, for example, a research that was done on a group of Nobel laureates who have come up with great insights. The researchers found out that, first of all, they needed to ask questions that were different from traditional research, because in order to unravel intuition, you ask different questions. Mm-hmm. It's in the nature of intuition. It's a different kind of logic, so to speak. It's not statistics, for example. But their research shows that among the laureates, what was key to their ability to come up with their big insights was their ability to switch between analysis and intuition. So it's that mental agility, the true rhythms that we should harness in order to bring out our intuition in a rigorous way. But what they also found out was that many of the Nobel laureates weren't aware that they were using their intuition. So when we're talking about, do we know if this group of people is more intuitive than others, then I'm really aware that we haven't done that much research that does justice to how intuition functions. And when you look at the PhDs and the really extensive research on intuition, you also realize that much of the work that's been done in the last decades has been about asking different questions in order to unearth how intuition functions versus analysis or calculations or other ways of exploring things. So I think that's a very valued task that we have ahead of us, right? Just imagine if all our kids went to school and they were taught how to, because I noticed in your wonderful book about values, you talk about inner compass. Just imagine if the inner compass was the main focus of education for our kids, how do you navigate the world? How do you show up? How do you show up in a way that you feel confident, trusting yourself to take on different things and meet different people and find yourself in different circumstances? So this is so different from how we're used to educating
Education
ourselves.
for me was so fragmented. I was in this, you're sent off to this place. And maybe it was my upbringing in South Africa where I wasn't quite prepared for the education experience. I'm not sure if anyone was, but you're sent off to this place and you're told to study these things and they're completely disconnected from each other. You've got maths here and it's numbers, and you've got words here and that's English, and you've got geography here and that's about maps, and you've got history down there and that's about stuff that happened long ago. But there's no holistic connection. Whereas real life is completely interconnected. And imagine if you were able to learn how to make better decisions and how to trust yourself and use that compass and almost become a wayfinder in a way, so that you can find the information that you need and absorb it in the right way and then be really present to your environment. This is what school should be all about, in my opinion.
I so agree. And so I've read a few books about intuition, and one of them is called Educating Intuition, and the other one is called Strategic Intuition. And so two things that came to mind when you were describing this. There is nothing that says that we need to divide knowledge into disciplines and not connecting between them. It's not even logical for the world we live in today. Because we no longer see the context between us and the natural world, and that it's actually to the detriment of all life if we use up our natural resources. Like, this should be common knowledge, It's not.
Yes.
We don't translate that into our actions and how we show up and plan our businesses. It's extraordinary in so many ways. And so Educating Intuition is a book that came out probably 2 or 3 decades ago. But it really delves into how some people with deep education in certain disciplines find it easier to make connections between silos and boxes and disciplines, and while others find it harder to make these connections, and it's because of their training and education. So that's one thing. So it's like I think we should take that seriously, because it's not helping us create flourishing futures like the status of the world is now. And then the other book, Strategic Intuition, or the work on that particular approach to intuition, is important also because there's a lot of talk about intuition in the new science. Intuition is built, good intuition is built on expertise, knowledge, and experience. Strategic intuition, when it comes to innovation, is also built on when to let go of what you know and unlearn what you know and be open to not knowing everything.
Yeah.
And I think that is sometimes forgotten when people are stepping out of the walls of science and daring to speak about intuition. It's like, actually, sometimes it's important not to know so much. Just be a kid again and go discover, be curious, ask questions about things you're supposed to know, because you might just receive different answers. And that will help us make things differently from how we have in the last decades and probably centuries,
And most of the really profound changes and transformations and inventions, if you really deconstruct them, it's often someone who's willing to unlearn and just re-examine the world from a slightly different perspective and go, look at these two dots and how they connect. When you're super specialized, you tend to miss those connections. And I think that's one of the skills that I've developed. Because I'm not an expert in any one area, you can step back innocently and just go, but imagine if that connected with that. That's interesting.
But like, on that note, do you think it's because you're not specialized in any area, or do you think it's because you may be specialized in one or more areas? You're just open to making connections.
True.
Between different,
True. Yeah.
And so I think, like, I come from a generation where sometimes people were called generalists. So if you know many different things from many directions, it's like almost like it meant you can't know something deeply. But I think you can know something deeply at the same time. And I think it's maybe we should say that you are an ecosystem thinker. So it doesn't undervalue what you know, but you just know how to connect dots, because not everybody know how to do that. And it's actually very important in order to see the big picture and how things are interconnected. Something that we may have lost sight of.
Ecosystem thinker. I love that. It's definitely that's, you know, I have the ability to go deep into specific subjects, as you said, not to the level of a PhD or an expert in any of those fields, but enough to be able to say, well, this concept from preventative medicine could apply here to digital marketing or whatever it might be. And this is where to me, that's where life gets interesting and fun.
And what you're actually describing is some of the fundamental things that we do in innovation.
Yes. Yeah. Which is probably why I lead the innovation lab at Resilience Institute. Yeah, it makes sense.
Connection there.
Yeah. When someone calls themselves an intuitive and a guide, what do you think? Is that real, or is it just someone who's quite empathetic and who's willing to listen and help you on your journey? Because I've met a few of them over the years, and they say, I'm an intuitive. What does that actually mean? Do you have any opinion?
I don't know if I can answer that. I think that the person, I mean, I'm like, I've met people like that as well. And I'm the way I understand it is that they follow their intuition. It's well harnessed, and they follow their feeling about people and guide them. When you say intuitive and a guide, is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, pretty much. It's like a coach in a way, but it's framed as I'm an intuitive. So it's almost like they're super connected to intuition in order to help you on your journey, I suppose.
Yeah. And so we also have people who are mediums and clairvoyant and people who are they just sense how you're feeling. You don't say anything, and all of a sudden they just stand beside you and put their hand on your shoulder, and you can feel that warmth, and you just know that they feel something, and there's nothing more, you know.
Yeah.
So I think this is, however, like, I don't know. I don't know if we have much research about it. I don't even know if we need much research about it.
True.
Because it's some people are very spiritual and they are very connected, and they find it very, sometimes even hard, how they feel like they tune into other people's energy. Some people are more sensitive like that than others, and I think it's a real experience. I think it's a real feeling, and I know a lot of people who are like that. In many ways, I am. Like, I can sense, sometimes I can sense things that I'm not really interested in sensing. Like, it can just be something that, you know, isn't my thing. But, you know, so I think we sense so much.
Yeah.
And people say that they are intuitive, and if they have experience guiding people from that perspective, and the experience is positive and constructive, then that's what they are.
How can intuition help us make better decisions? Do you have a process for that?
So one of the things that the science will tell us is, when you have an expertise in an area, you don't have to have a PhD, but when you have an expertise in an area, you can be a BMX rider or a sports person or play the piano or diving into literature, whatever it is, then it will make your intuition into that area better and possibly quite good and very good. People will often say, if you're really new to an area, then don't trust your intuition. And a friend of mine who works on the brain and neuroscience, he said, you know, we wouldn't send a man to the moon based on intuition alone, but it actually helps us take good decisions. But your question was how it can help us take better decisions, right? Yeah. So definitely, and for so many reasons. So one of them is, if you are aligned with your intuition. And it's not far from your description of being aligned with your values. When you're aligned with your intuition, and now let's think about professional intuition, like you're aligned with it. And you're also aligned with that. You're also aligned with the people that you're with, the team around you, and you're taking decisions the way intuition can help you. And remember the definition of the sea within. The sea within needs to flow, our unconsciousness. If we put it into boxes or silos, it ceases to flow. So when we are tunnel viewed or anxious or stressed, it inhibits our intuition. So this means that being aligned with our intuition and regulating our nervous system and being present helps us open up our mind to possibilities. We do become better listeners. We do become more creative, and we find more solutions. There is also a lot of emphasis in my book about how we explore the world as we go through the day, how open we are to things that we didn't deliberately decide to find on our way during that particular day. It broadens our perspective and helps us see new things that can benefit and inform our intuition in ways that is very helpful for us, because intuition connects us to the real world. And when we're disconnected from ourselves, we become more disconnected from other people and the world around us. I hope I'm describing this well enough, because in all these things that I'm describing, we are collecting a broad variety of information. We are also open to information that we didn't decide beforehand that we were going to get. Because the more we do that, the less creative and open-minded we are. The more able we are to go into the unknown, because everything puts us off. I didn't expect this to happen. Why am I not in control of this situation? But the more that we are aligned with our intuition, we are more prepared for all these things. So, but also for taking better decisions. When we use our intuition with our other faculties like analysis and reason and stuff like that, we enhance mental agility. We are also more likely to sleep better, to take better care of our bodies and mind, because we are more aware of ourselves and the embodiment of the knowledge that we have. And this all kind of goes together. And sometimes I wonder, I don't know what you think about that, Brad, but sometimes I wonder, because intuition is stored in our whole bodies and being.
Mm.
Does it make it less credible when we take decisions? Would it be more credible to us if it lied external to us in the form of an amazing machine?
Mm-hmm. A crystal ball or something like that.
Yeah. Or a new technology that we trust better than our own judgment.
True. No, I'm with you that it is this embodied experience, and tuning into it is so important. I love the idea of the ocean, the sea within, and the tides that come in, because there's new input changing that sea within all the time. One of my favorite quotes, it actually came from technology. It was, an entity is defined by the nature of its relationships. And I thought, so too are we, so be aware of the relationships you're cultivating, those bridges that you're sending out into the world, and what inputs are arriving internally, so that you can be, create some filters where needed, but also be very open where that's going to support you.
Yeah, and I love that. And that reminds me of, quantum physics, is that when particles connect, they actually exist. And, I just recently, a colleague of mine put this into such clear language for me that I was just stunned, and I've been thinking about it ever since. So when you and I are in a room together, we co-regulate. We talked about how our brain waves connect, our heart begin to sync to the same rhythms, our neurons begin to fire and connect in the same room. So we co-regulate in this way. Mm-hmm. What this also means from the perspective of us being a social animal is that, loneliness can kill us, or it can really be to the detriment of our physical and mental health. And this we know in the world today. We have ministers of loneliness, and it's a big pandemic. or it's very widespread.
Mm-hmm.
So we need each other to co-regulate, and we can literally die if we don't have other people, another being to co-regulate with.
Yeah.
There's another layer on top of this, which is the following. According to the World Health Organization, stress, anxiety, and depression are the leading causes of illness and disability in the world today. What this means is that so many of us are burdened with extreme too much stress, anxiety, and let alone depression. But think about the workplace, the schools, and the different homes that we travel between during the week or so. If the majority of people in these groups are overly stressed and anxious, this is what we're co-regulating. So if you look at the anxious generation and the work of Jonathan Haidt and his team in the US, another movement in the UK, and in different parts of the world, we're saying that the younger generation is raised up with feeling anxious. What if they don't know the norm to be not anxious?
Yeah.
How can they co-regulate that feeling? I just find it such a compelling
You have to learn.
thought.
You have to unlearn anxiety and relearn calm presence.
Yeah, exactly. And how can you know you need that if you've never felt calm presence and you don't witness it at home or at school even?
This is very interesting. And I had never experienced that as a child until I went surfing. And suddenly I
Really?
experienced presence. Yeah. So perhaps for young people, spending more time in nature. And there are many programs that are having great success because suddenly you don't have that technology with you, and you're kind of forced to just be present to your environment and to each other. That was my first experience of real presence, was paddling out on a surfboard and sitting out there just going, whoa, this is a completely uncertain environment, but fear is not going to help me right now. So let's just be present. When is a wave going to come? And it really, I think that was a huge transformation in my own life, finding something like that.
And I can imagine. And I can also imagine that you also learned to trust your own body.
Yeah.
You needed to trust your own body in order to survive. And that's also very empowering, right?
It is. Yeah. Absolutely. So do you think there is value in people applying ancient wisdom to the modern world? Because we've become very focused on science, but there is so much wisdom out there. And when I bring concepts from, for example, Stoicism into my workshops, people really take notice and they're like, wow, that's such an interesting concept. And it's thousands of years old. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely agree. There's so much wisdom that's already there. It's been there for hundreds and thousands of years. A lot of it is what science is confirming so that we can feel more calm about trusting in it. But personally, I refer to science a lot when I'm talking about intuition because I want to speak to a broad group of people. But personally, there's life experience more than anything that has taught me personally the wisdom in old wisdom. There's so much of what I do in my work around intuition today that can be found in old wisdom. And somebody said, I can't remember her name now, but she said, the ice age in science towards spiritualism is thawing. So the ice is thawing. And it's not about scientists not being spiritual. It's about the culture in science giving more permission to look to old wisdom or spiritualism. So I think that there's definitely, and I really, even, when we talk about it at length, I'm not sure if people would find it very logical to say that we should only rely on science or only rely on spiritualism or only rely on philosophy or whatever who said that was a good idea,
Yeah, very true. Very true. Weaving them together, finding what works for you. That's a far better approach to life from my perspective, because we think we're at the end point in terms of scientific progress and discovery, often we're like, look how sophisticated we are.
Yeah.
In 200 years, what we know right now will be rudimentary. It'll be laughed at, just as we chuckle when people thought the earth was flat just a few hundred years ago.
Yes,
Mm.
exactly. And also, you know, just to be honest, I think that a lot of the technological advancement and technological advancement in particular is something that a lot of it is amazing and to the fulfillment of a richer life. But a lot of it is also just really crap when it comes to honoring life and thinking how we want to enter flourishing futures for the coming generations. It's not very wise. It's not very smart. It's not very clever.
Yeah.
So I do think that in many cases we could do so well with learning more from ancient wisdom when it comes to, you know, finding harmony and balance in nature between humans, you know, how it is very unclear where I end and you begin, you know, the eyes are the spirit of the soul, you know, all these beautiful language and metaphors that we have from really ancient wisdom I think many of us could do better in honoring them more than we do today.
The spiritual entertainer, as he called himself, Alan Watts, who was very influential on me, he said that you're not a stranger here. Just as an apple tree apples, the earth peoples. And when you think of it from that perspective, you realize intuitively how we should become stewards of this planet. And I think that aligns with your mission and interest as well. Any final thoughts on, you know, how we can leverage intuition to just care for this little blue dot that's floating in the vastness of space?
Yeah, I think that the more of us that really tune into our InnSæi and intuition, you know, intuition through the lens of InnSæi, which is really grounding in ourselves. And when we are grounded in ourselves, we are better able to understand innately how we are connected to each other and the world around us and see the big picture. I think that is the act that we should be focusing on. And we can do it through so many ways, and it really depends on what people relate to. For some people, they relate to meditation. For other people, it makes sense to walk barefoot on the ground for a few minutes a day.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, it's good to go and stand by the sea. For some people, they don't have access to the sea, so they will do something else. So it's like my book is full of exercises and tips around that. But the most important thing is to do the work of aligning yourself with the sea within. And from there, allow the world to open up to you in a different way. And I think it sounds simple. It is simple and yet very complicated because we make it very complicated. But I think that's the biggest act that we need to do. And when we've done that collectively, the rest solves itself. You know, you just begin to see things differently because you understand how things are interconnected and that it's not okay to think things in silos. You know, it's not okay to do stuff that is to the detriment of nature or other people because, yeah, it's you know, so it just changes, it shifts your center of gravity in how you show up, experience the world, and how you want to give back to it.
Ecosystem thinking. I love it. Hrund, how can people find out more? Where would you like them to go? And of course, these links will be in the show notes.
Yeah, so I think that probably the shortest way would be to go to my website, and I'm not making anyone's life easier when I say this. So my website is my full name.com. So if you Google InnSæi, you will always find my name with it, I think, in most of the cases. So hrundgunnsteinsdóttir.com would be my website. I recommend you go there and find information.
Excellent. Any final thoughts for those who stuck with us all the way to the end?
Well, thank you for sticking with us all the way to the end. I really enjoyed our conversation. Maybe I'll just leave people with the question to ponder. When was the last time you didn't listen to your intuition? Where did you feel it? And what happened as a result? And then you can also say, when was the last time you did listen to your intuition? Where did you feel it? And what happened as a result?
Everyone, there is a little box for comments. Write it in there, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Hrund, thank you so much. What a pleasure connecting today.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me.